go. So, Maggie, it'd be awesome to get started with a little bit of your personal journey into the world of veganism. What's kind of brought you here?
Yeah, so it's been quite a few years in the making. I went vegan 9 years ago, this summer actually. But it started with me going vegetarian when I was 12 years old. I was a kid growing up in the Midwest in Michigan, and had a love for animals, would always ask my mom at the McDonald's drive-thru, you know, what animal is this? What animal is this? As I would like, before I bite into my sandwich or my chicken nuggets. And she'd always tell me, and she said she felt a little bit guilty about that as well. And so then shortly after, my cousin was vegetarian. I went down and visited her one summer, and she kind of converted me the old school way of guilting people into doing it. Very PETA activist, but it worked on me. And so I went vegetarian, never looked back. Then my mom actually went, at first, you know, my parents freaked out. And then eventually my mom went vegan, and was a writer, was researching. So she kind of convinced me to give up the dairy. I was still doing it if it was mixed into a cake or mixed into something. But so yeah, 9 years ago, I went to New Zealand, stayed on a dairy farm, firsthand saw that whole process. I even like milked the cows. And it was just devastating to see, you know, those animals in so much pain. So that's what started my vegan journey. But then after, you know, I realized the health benefits and the environmental impact and all of the extra good stuff.
I'm really fascinated by, and forgive my my naive perception of geography in America, but I'm really fascinated by growing up in the Midwest, and obviously, like, you had a very supportive family and so on. But what was your experiences like at kind of, you know, school, in the town that you lived in, the wider culture? Was being even vegetarian quite a strange move by other people's perceptions at that time, or was it quite accepted?
It was very strange. I think I was probably the only vegetarian in my school, and it was not widely accepted. People didn't even know what it meant. They especially didn't know what veganism was. So I remember when my mom first went vegan a few years after I went vegetarian, and we would go to a restaurant, and she would even say the word, and the waiter just looked total. They had no idea what she was talking about. So then she had to say, okay, you know, I can't do dairy. And they would say, oh, you can do a potato. Oh, but it has butter on it. You know, it was like we had to explain exactly. So it was totally different than Los Angeles is now. And even the Midwest, even Michigan has much better vegan options than they did when I was a kid, especially like, yeah, there weren't even vegetarian options when you went to a restaurant, let alone vegan options. But now there's just so much, but it's culturally so different from the two coasts. The Midwest is very, I love it. It's great. The people are nice, but it's kind of behind. It's not as progressive as the two coasts.
What led you to New Zealand? Was this just a bit of, you know, wanderlust, wanting to get out there and see the world?
Yeah, so I was in college, and one summer I had never traveled abroad before. I traveled done a lot of traveling around the US, and I wanted to take a trip by myself. I had just broken up with a boyfriend, needed to go see the world, and decided New Zealand was it, because I met, you know, as any college kid would do, I met a family on the internet and decided I would go watch their children for a summer as an au pair. And my dad was totally freaked out by the idea. He did not want me to go stay with someone I'd never met. But I went, had the time of my life. It was amazing. I still talk to the family to this day, but they were dairy farmers, and that's how they made their money. And unlike, you know, not unlike a huge amount of people in New Zealand who are dairy farmers. It's one of their, you know, major industries there. And it was a great experience. They definitely treat their animals better in New Zealand than they do in the US. There's just factory farm. There, I mean, there's no like humane way to do it. But regardless, that was in a country that like treats their animals better, and it was still so tragic for me to experience.
Yeah, I bet. Was that, you know, at what point did you, because you were vegetarian at this point, I take it, so you were still kind of consuming dairy. I'm fascinated by was there like a moment? Do you remember there being like a pivotal point where you were there in New Zealand thinking, this isn't what I thought dairy was?
Yes, it was when I was actually, because when I was in the house watching the kids, like, you know, and we would have breakfast and the milk and everything, it was fine. But it was when I was actually at the dairy farm at 5 a.m. with like my coveralls and gum boots, and it was freezing cold. and I was hooking these cows up to machinery that was like freezing. They were cold. I was cold. They were infected. They were kicking. They were pooping everywhere. They were crying. And then at the end of the day, well, I also saw the milk actually getting processed afterwards, which just did not look appetizing to me at all. And then at the end of the day, this truck came. And I remember I was there with like all these other kids from around the world who were like working on the farm. And this truck came and hauled away the cows that were deemed no longer, you know, like good to make dairy. So they just went and took them away and killed them. They would put an X on them and took them away and killed them. And after seeing that, I remember that moment. I was like, I cannot support this any longer. So I went back to the house that night and I told my host mom, I'm vegan now. And she was like the most supportive, because I feel like if anyone told me that and I was a, you know, dairy farmer's wife, I would have been like, no, like you're saying you have to drink the milk, you know. But she was like, great, like I'll get you soy milk at the store. She was so nice, but she kept buying skim milk on accident. And so from that point on, I just drank skim milk for the rest of the trip because I didn't want to hurt her feelings. But when I got back to the US, I went completely vegan. So it was really firsthand seeing that myself. Because I think it's easy to separate when you're, you know, at your house eating a bowl of cereal. You don't think about the animals, but when you're actually doing the work, I mean, I assume people who make a living off of it, after a while, they just get used to it and that's how it is. But I think for me, who wasn't used to that, seeing that firsthand was very eye-opening.
There's, as you were telling that story, then I was sort of taken back to a conversation I had a while back with a director called Alex Lockwood, who directed a film called 73 Cows. It's a short film about a dairy farmer who actually switched to beef farming and then eventually switched to veganism and a veganic farm because he felt there was more cruelty in dairy than there was in beef farming. And then obviously he moved away from all of it. Do you think there was any, because you mentioned obviously that the farmers there kind of were receptive to you going vegan. Do you think there was any sense in their minds that they kind of knew something, it wasn't, they could understand why someone wouldn't like this?
I feel like they had to understand. I mean, they definitely understood vegetarianism because I was vegetarian at the time when I came to stay with them. And one of their daughters was vegetarian, and you know, she was like 12 years old. So same thing. She was going vegetarian about the age I went vegetarian. So I think they understood that meat was cruel. And I think they also probably understood that dairy wasn't much better or could be worse. But they had to make a living, you know? It's like these weren't wealthy people. They were trying to make ends meet. And so I think sometimes people don't have another option because that's just their job. That's what they've always done. That's, you know, and it's really cool to hear those stories, like you said, like where the farmers turn into vegan farms and produce other types of crops and things like that. But for people to do that, I think it's still pretty rare. I would love to see more of it. I think people need more resources and different types of things to help coach them going that direction. But yeah, I don't know if anyone like actually loves the idea of dairy farm. I'm sure people do, but I think it's, like I said, it's a job probably. Yeah,
I think you're probably right. It probably feels like a sort of necessary evil or kind of, you know, at worst a necessary evil and probably at best to them, just this is the way we've always done it, you know? Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
At what point did you, from there then, you came back to, did you go straight back to LA? Did you go back to the Midwest and then move to LA? At what point did LA come into your life?
Yeah, so I went back to the Midwest. I was going to Michigan State University. So I went to college in Michigan. And then when I graduated, I had always wanted to move to California. I had been here, you know, on vacation growing up as a kid, and I wanted to live somewhere warm. Michigan winters are very cold. It's not an ideal climate to live in. I don't know how I did it for like 24 years. But I always wanted to move to California. After graduating college, I moved back in with my parents for about a year, saved some money, did AmeriCorps, which is like full-time volunteering for the government, giving back. So I worked for a nonprofit in a couple elementary schools, and that kind of played into my journey of like wanting to help people go vegan because I saw the horrible foods that were served in elementary schools. And then after I finished that year of AmeriCorps, I moved out to Los Angeles. And I've been here for about 7 years now.
And what was your experience moving out there as a vegetarian who's turned to veganism and so on? Was it poles apart from the Midwest and New Zealand, I take it?
It was. It's interesting because I didn't actually realize that Los Angeles was kind of like the vegan capital of the U.S. Until I got out here. So I had always heard, great things about California and the food out here, but I never really had an intention of moving to Los Angeles. It just is where I landed. My ex-boyfriend's job was here, or he got a job here, and so we ended up in Los Angeles. But I never had my sights on LA specifically. But it was a blessing because after we moved here, I started discovering, they have fully vegan restaurants here. They have all these options at non-vegan restaurants for vegans. And so there was just so much to explore that I wasn't used to. My hometown still doesn't have a fully vegan restaurant. So it's just, my neighborhood now probably has 10, it's just really cool. It's so different.
And did you find I take it you did, but did you find a community of people there that sort of welcomed you in? So was there a vegan community, if you like, that you met?
Oh yeah, definitely a vegan community. And when shortly after, I got here, I started going to different vegan events that would happen. They were a lot smaller than they are now. The community was smaller, which is cool to have seen the community grow over the years. But yeah, it was awesome because I went to these events and there were people that you didn't even have to explain yourself to. I was used to hanging out with people who my close friends knew, that I was vegan and they would accommodate, but they would always want to go to traditional restaurants, and then I'd have to find a salad or French fries or something. So it was nice to just be around people who you didn't even have to think about what you're eating. You don't have to explain yourself. They get it. And meet some new friends. The community was very welcoming in Los Angeles. And I've heard different things about different cities, but LA's vegan community is amazing. And that's kind of what led me to starting my magazine.
Yeah, tell us about that. So what sort of led to it? What was the kind of the initial seed of inspiration for a magazine?
Yes. So as I said, when I first got to Los Angeles, I was going to events. I was looking for the best restaurants, but I was having trouble at the same time. So there were amazing resources like Happy Cow, which is international food listings, restaurant directory. But things like Yelp or Eater or LA Weekly, these different publications or websites and tools that we had to look for restaurants or events were not vegan specific. So even if you type in vegan to Google, we weren't getting like a curated list. And so it would send me to a restaurant that might not be the best in LA. It might just have some options. So I was like, okay, no one is doing this. No one is curating this. This needs to be a thing. Even Happy Cow is great. I love it. But it wasn't like it didn't tell me the best places to go, right? It was like, here's all the restaurants, but I wanted to know, if I go to this spot, what do I order? If I go to this spot, what do I order? Like, I want to know the best. And I think a lot of people want to know the best too, because they don't want to waste their money. So that's why I started. I started a small blog. It was like, I'd post, it's like embarrassing to think about, but I would like personally write the article and post maybe like once a week or something like that. And then Instagram was super hot at the time. I feel like it had been maybe 3 years into it being, so it was like 3 years old maybe at that time. And so I started on Instagram. I had no idea what I was doing, but it just grew and grew and grew. It grew really fast those first couple months. And I think it was because people also wanted this. They wanted to know where they could eat, where they could find vegan options, where they could go to events. And LA didn't have something like this. So I really grew the Los Angeles page and grew the Los Angeles publication. And then when I got it to a point, I realized, okay, the rest of the country needs this as well. And so we started expanding. But it started as a digital publication, then we went print.
And it's kind of incredible. You've gone way beyond just food and restaurant recommendations, although that would have been an incredible resource on its own, like you say. But you know, there's interviews and, you know, tips and lifestyle, and there's so many different angles to it. Was that kind of always something you intended to do, or was it always like, you know, restaurants at the beginning and that's just evolved over the course of time as you got deeper into the kind of culture? Yeah,
it's funny because I don't think I ever intended to do anything. Like it's interesting because some people start a business and they have like a business plan and they know exactly the vision of where they want it to go. I just started fulfilling this need, and then as it grew and snowballed, I was like, okay, well, people also want to know like what products are vegan, what clothing is vegan. There's so much more than just food to living a vegan lifestyle. And so people would ask us, and as I would get questions, I was like, okay, well, we need to write about this. We need to cover this. And so it just organically kind of evolved that way. And then we also would get like, you know, celebrities involved, athletes involved, because I think when people see athletes and celebrities who are living plant-based, vegan lifestyle, it's more motivation for them, because they can, you know, they think, oh, well, if they can do it, I can do it. It's a bit influential. So we're now like a pop culture lifestyle magazine as a whole, not just a food magazine.
Have you felt more of a... Sorry to go deep with this question, but I'm gonna go deep because it's come to mind. So, have you felt more of a pressure as it's expanded? Have you felt more of a pressure as it's expanded from restaurants, lifestyle, and it's got bigger, and it's like you say, a reference point for kind of culture, vegan culture in so many different guises? Have you felt any sense of pressure to develop a very specific tone on certain subjects, a voice on certain things? Have you felt there's probably more need for you to sort of step in editorially than perhaps you did at the beginning when it was kind of like, here's a great restaurant? I'm curious as to, you know, starting out from restaurants, getting into kind of pop culture, all these different reference points, lifestyle, so on and so forth. The vegan community, from my experience anyway, has sort of disagreement within it about whether it should be single issue, whether it should be intersectional, these kind of different angles. And have you felt the need as sort of the founder of the magazine to sort of step in a little bit more editorially and develop more of a clear voice on some of those subjects? Or do you take more of the view that actually all these things exist and they all just need to be out there for people to kind of hear and decide?
Oh, definitely. So I think this is the direction you're going. But so last summer with the George Floyd protests across the country, across the world, and here in LA, you know, Black Lives Matter was a huge hot topic, and it still is. And I mean, it's racism in America and in the world has been an issue forever. But we definitely took a stand on that. I was like out at protests myself. We were partnering with different organizations, anytime those issues come up. And I think that was the first thing that really taught me. It made me grow as a founder, because I feel like before that, I never took a stand on my business on my personal stuff. I've been outspoken since I was born, but like on my business, I always was taught, because I used to work for an accounting firm, and I was always taught, you know, separate politics from business, and like don't take a side and blah, 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 blah. And that was like always what I was taught, especially being from the Midwest. And then when the events happened last summer, I was like, no, this is wrong. And yes, we're a vegan publication, but what's on brand for us is to speak up for what's right. And so after that, we started speaking up on, you know, pretty much any issue, and trying to support, obviously we can post to social media all day, but you know, what else? I kept thinking, what else can we do to support different causes besides veganism? Because they're all related. And so we would do roundups and articles and coverage, and just try to incorporate more people of color, more women, own businesses, and give people the spotlight who typically don't get the spotlight in the vegan community, because it can be pretty whitewashed. And so that's what I wanted to do with our publication. And I think the Black Lives Matter stuff last summer just really opened my eyes that we don't have to just talk about veganism, because, human rights, animal rights, poverty, all of these different social issues are intertwined. And so I think it's not just like a good thing to do, but it's so necessary to do at this point.
I completely agree. And that's actually what I wanted to talk about.
So did that answer your question?
It absolutely,
yeah.
It absolutely answered the question, because I think that's I wanted to touch on it because, that's certainly the viewpoint that I hold, is that, oppressions are interlinked, that you can't get away from that. It's clear, the sort of the hand that tips the scales for one group who are kind of oppressed is often tipping the scales for every other group, whether it's non-human animals, the black community, LGBTQ plus communities, wherever you look. I think these oppressions are interlinked. I absolutely agree with that. But I have definitely, in my limited experience as a sort of podcaster, if you like, encountered some folks who perhaps don't hold, excuse me, who perhaps don't hold the view that us in the quote unquote vegan community should be talking about those kind of issues, or it's not relevant, or these kind of things. And so I think one of the things that I've enjoyed personally about Veg Out is that it's maintained the approachable nature that's made it successful, but has also not shied away from being clear on where it stands and whose voice it's platforming and amplifying. So I just wanted to ask the question from the point of view of a founder who, because I like you started when I started the podcast, I didn't, and I feel bad that I didn't at the time. But when I look back, I think I came into this thinking, I'll just have some lovely chats with folks in the vegan community and so on, and it'll be great, and this, that, and the other. And then over the course of time, I felt far more responsibility to use that platform to talk about other things, and make it clear where I stand. So I'm just intrigued from your point of view. Was there any, and I will turn this into a question, sorry for my rambling musings, but was there any pushback from people as the tone perhaps started to change from Veg Out, as you became, very sort of much more strident in your kind of tone?
100%. And I think you're always going to have the pushback, the people who disagree, the haters, if you will, when you take a stand on anything, right? And but those aren't the people I want in my community to be following us, right? Our page is a safe space for everyone, and it's inclusive. So yeah, when we first started posting, I think like that first Black Lives Matter post, shortly after the George Floyd incident, after he was murdered, we had we had a lot of people obviously agreeing with us, agreeing with our stance, but we had a lot of people who've even followed us for a long time at that point who were like, I'm unfollowing, this is a vegan page, stop talking politics, which I would argue that's not even politics, but, all of these comments, tons of them. And I was like, you know what, we're losing a few followers, but I think overall, the people who it brings to you are like even better. And those are the people I want following us anyway. I don't want the people who are, racist or won't take a stand or whatever. And it just makes your brand stronger as a whole. And we obviously didn't do it for like the PR or to make our brand stronger. But I feel like for me personally as a consumer, the brands I saw during that time and like currently who take stands on issues are the ones that I want to support. I don't really have an interest in supporting brands or companies who, either don't take a stand at all or take a stand in the opposite of the viewpoints that I have. So I think that's becoming a thing in general with businesses and with consumers. I think people want that transparency. And if they don't, they demand that transparency. And if they don't have it, they get upset. Because actually, it all happened so fast. But I do remember the first message we got after George Floyd was killed. Someone was like, I can't believe you're not taking a stance on this. I hadn't even heard it. It was like right away. I hadn't even like heard about what happened. So I was like Googling, trying to figure out. And then like no hesitation, we made a post, and then we started figuring out, you know, internally what we could do to help and to support the Black community. But I think people definitely want that transparency, and they want to know that, you know, they're being supported, that that companies have their back. Because why would you, you know, as a Black person or as a gay person or whoever, support a company that doesn't have your interests in mind? It just doesn't make sense.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. I just want to sort of reverse a little bit, actually, because, you know, just what you've talked about there as you having to learn, grow as a founder in that last kind of, you know, 18 months. And I imagine that's, you know, since you founded VegOut, there's been various touch points. What was your experience going into it? Because I'd imagine, for me personally, if somebody said to me, you're going to found a very successful vegan magazine, I personally would be quite scared by that prospect and wouldn't necessarily feel like I could do it justice. I certainly couldn't, and not in the way that you have. What was did you have a background in kind of journalism, in writing of this nature, or was this kind of a learned skill?
So, well, kind of both. So I went to school for advertising, creative advertising and copywriting. And so my professional experience was in advertising marketing, which has definitely helped build a media company. But I myself am not necessarily a writer, but I've been surrounded by writers my whole life. My mom's a writer. So that definitely helped. We had the experience to start. And by we, like my mom, I brought on right away. She was kind of my co-founder, but my managing editor, and still is to this day. She's amazing. And so we did have the experience, but all of the stuff that comes along with starting a company, that was all totally learned. I've never, you know, this is my first company, and I have always been crafty and entrepreneurial before I knew what the word meant, but my whole life. But I didn't know anything about how to do accounting or how to do sales or how to do all these other tasks that you have to do before you have the money to actually afford a team, and you're just trying to do everything yourself. And, you know, even things like being on a podcast, you know, I had never done that before starting VegOut. So I think all of these things you just learn them as you go along, and then you just kind of just jump in the deep end. You learn them as you go. I think what has helped me is, I think, being a little naive. Because looking back, like you said, the thought is terrifying. I would say no, like, don't sign me up for that. But I was just jumped in, started doing things, little naive, and that's kind of what got me to where I am today. But everything has been a learning experience, and still is. There are things I'm taking on today, projects we're working on that I've never done before. I don't think it ever gets easier, but I think you get better and you gain experience. So
I can't imagine as well, sort of learning in the public eye. You talked there about it being, you know, you talked at the beginning of the journey about it being quite successful quite quickly. Was that in itself quite a scary process? Because I imagine, you know, from my limited experience, when you're doing a podcast with at the very beginning and there's not many people listening to it, you kind of feel like, well, if I've made a couple of mistakes here and there and people point a couple of things out, that's fine. I can kind of live with that. But when success comes quickly, you know, what was that experience like, kind of learning in public, if you like?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the interesting thing. Once we got on Instagram, because the blog that we had on our website, no one was looking at except, you know, my friend group and my mom. But once we got on Instagram, there were strangers who were looking at the page, which was, and it was a quick, you know, quick grow. And then it was kind of organically over time, it grew from there. But I had never had that many followers on social media myself, so I didn't know what that entailed. And at that point I was posting like blurry camera phone, iPhone, avocado toast pictures that I was taking. You know, it was like, I was not a photographer, so I was just posting things I would find at restaurants. And it was not the quality. Like if I think we archived a lot of posts, but if you were to like scroll all the way through, the evolution of photos, it just gets better. And so that was definitely, I was like, wow, we really need to, as we grew, I was like, we really need to like get better photos. We need to get a team. Like there's all these things that I was like, we need to, but I think the mistake that a lot of people make is they think they need all of that stuff before they start. I kind of started before I had all that stuff. And so I was making mistakes. I was making things better, but it was all kind of in the eyes of our audience and our followers. But our community that we had created was so cool, so supportive. We would try things, we would do all sorts of things that we don't do today, but we would try different projects, different interactive online events, things like that. And sometimes they totally flopped, but we just kept going and people loved it and supported it. And I'm forever thankful for our early followers who got us to where we are now. So, yeah.
Was there a story over the course of time that's kind of stuck in your mind? One that you think, that was the moment I really felt like this is a successful publication and we're doing well. I'm proud of that piece of journalism, if you like. Was there one that stood out, or was that quite an evolutionary process?
There's not one article I don't think that stood out, but the moment we got into Whole Foods Market nationwide, so now they're a distributor of ours. The moment we got into Whole Foods, I felt like, and we got in right away. It was like on the first try. It wasn't like we had to continue. A lot of times it's really hard to get into Whole Foods with any product, but a lot of times it's like multiple tries before they will sell your product. It's like college admissions. But when we got into Whole Foods, I felt like, okay, we have something here. This is something people want. Grocery stores want it. Consumers want it. Veganism is growing. And what's cool about our success is that it doesn't just represent like my success and VegOut's success. It represents the success of the vegan movement as a whole. And so it was like really cool to see the company grow, because it just means more and more people are demanding vegan options. And I love to see that.
I was going to ask you about that on that sort of note, how we kind of gauge what our barometer is for success within the vegan community. I go back and forth with this a lot, and I have misgivings about, we've I don't know if this has happened in the US, but there's been a lot of talk recently about a vegan Kit Kat, for example, made by Nestle and so on. And, some people would hold this up as like this mark of success. And I struggle with that as a concept, that particular product. I might be able to talk about a smaller business and so on, but I would love to get your insight, because I think you're much deeper into this than I am, and much closer. Your view on sort of veganism being commercialized, these new products coming out every day. How do you feel about that?
So I love it. Personally, yes, I would, personally, I like to support 100% vegan small businesses first when I can. But I know that that's a privilege, and that not everyone has access to 100% vegan restaurants or brands or whatever it may be, or maybe the costs are too high. So just given the world we live in, like ideally I would love if everyone grew their own food and didn't eat processed foods. And it's like just this whole, it would be amazing, right, if that was the world we lived in. But I recognize, especially being from the Midwest, that that's not how it is. That's not the reality. And we have to meet people where they are. And ideally, people aren't eating Impossible Whoppers from Burger King and vegan Kit Kats and supporting these companies and, eating processed foods all the time. But they're great transitional foods, and they're great products that I know, my family in the Midwest, if they're at the store, they're not going to go to the health food market. They're going to the big box grocery store. And if they go to Costco or Sam's Club or one of these big grocery store chains, and there's a vegan version of a product they usually buy, they might pick it up and try it. They're not going to go out of their way to seek, the specialty products. But if there's something in front of them at a grocery store, they might try it. And I know for me, that's what got me to try vegetarian is, Boca burgers at the time were the big thing, and they were sold at the regular grocery store. And I remember getting like a veggie burger from Burger King when I was a kid. They had a vegetarian veggie burger. And so those were the foods that really helped me transition before I knew about all these small, great brands. And so in addition to these large companies, and yes, I think a lot of corporations are evil, and that I wish they would have better practices, for their employees and treat people better in general, right? But if we're looking at the large scale, these corporations who are adapting to the vegan movement and coming out with plant-based products, the corporations just want to make money. So if people are going to buy plant-based products, they're going to come out with plant-based products because they're making money off of it. So if with that comes accessibility, these products will be available distributed nationwide or worldwide, versus a small company usually can't get that type of distribution, as well as like marketing budgets. Driving around LA, Beyond Meat, they're an all vegan company, but for instance, Beyond Meat or Chobani even, who recently launched oat-based products, will have billboards and they'll have TV commercials. And this is information in mainstream media that small companies can't afford to do. And while it's unfortunate, that's just the world we live in. So I think it does help with that bigger message of like plant-based is happening, it's now. And then it kind of helps people transition. And then if people, become more plant-based, they'll discover more products. And then on the other side, what I mentioned earlier is accessibility. Not every, and price point. I live in a city with amazing vegan options, but even in my city, there are areas like South Central that doesn't have health food stores and doesn't have a ton of fully vegan restaurants. But they might have a Burger King, or they might have a corner store that has, a vegan chip or snack or something that one of these big companies is putting out. And so I think we need to think about it from that perspective. And at the end of the day, if people are choosing a vegan option versus a non-vegan one, they're still saving an animal. And that's the whole point. But yeah, it's a complex situation, because personally, I don't want to support those companies, but I know that we have to kind of look at it from other perspectives as well. And that I'm very privileged to be able to go to 100% vegan restaurants and buy from small companies online, or buy from small companies locally, and spend the extra money. But not everyone's able to do that. Yeah,
like you say, it's an incredibly complex issue, and I think you've summed it up beautifully, far better than I could. So thank you so much for that. Moving on, just thinking about that subject a little bit further. What do you think is kind of incumbent upon us within the sort of quote unquote vegan community to break down some of those? In some cases they may be truths, but in some cases some of the misnomers and the myths that veganism may be too expensive for people, or maybe an option that they just can't access. Do you think there is some steps that we sort of in the vegan community need to take, stories we need to amplify more, angles we need to talk about, whether that be whole food, plant-based cooking, or I don't know, but do you think there is some action that we can all sort of take to amplify the right messages?
There's definitely action we can take. And I think that's what scares a lot of people off. I was just talking to my best friend about this. Veganism as a movement, as a lifestyle, doesn't seem achievable to most people, I feel, because, they think, well, I have to do all of this to be 100% vegan and I just don't have the time, or, they're single parents with kids, or they have working a couple jobs, and it doesn't seem like an achievable thing to do. So we need to make it more accessible and approachable. And we can do that in a variety of ways. But one, for like just an easy thing, is instead of buying, if you're trying to incorporate more fruits and vegetables, instead of buying fresh produce, which obviously is more ideal, at a farmer's market in LA that's like super expensive, or organic or whatever, just buy some frozen fruits and veggies, throw it in your freezer. Coming up with ways to make it easier for people to incorporate more plant-based foods, and not making it seem like you have to go 100% vegan. If you can go as as much plant-based as you can go, that's amazing. And just meeting people where they are, and then making it known that while there are some great vegan versions of burgers and eggs and all these animal products, those can be more expensive because they're not subsidized by the government. But you don't have to eat those things. Those can be a treat, and you can eat, things like peanut butter and frozen fruits and vegetables and rice and beans and all these amazing foods that you can get pretty cheap at the grocery store. So education around that, I think, is super necessary. But it's going to take all of us, especially those who have a platform, to spread that word. Because I was on a Clubhouse chat, and someone who wasn't vegan asked the question about how can she incorporate more fruits and vegetables into her diet. And, this is someone who I think we sometimes forget. With the best intentions, we sometimes forget how it is to not be vegan because we've been doing it for so long or we're so passionate about it. But we have to remember how it is in her shoes. And people were suggesting, grow your own food or shop farmers markets. Because the thing is, like, produce, goes bad quickly. And so I suggested just buy frozen. And that is just a lot more achievable than this woman who's busy, who's not trying to, focus her full-time energy on going vegan, can incorporate into her lifestyle. She's not going to grow her own food. You know what I'm saying? Like, maybe eventually she will, but at the beginning, we need to make it more accessible.
I think you're so right. We sometimes come at it from an angle of, this is all the acquired knowledge that I've got over X amount of years, and your transition point should be to get exactly where I am now, which actually that's taken you years to get to. So it would be completely unrealistic to, I always think we forget what it was like the day before we went vegan,
100%. And yeah, when I first went vegetarian, I was eating mac and cheese and like potato chips and Oreos. I wasn't eating like I am now. I probably wasn't even getting the nutrients I needed, And so I think just letting people be human and make mistakes and just like live their lives, instead of say you have to strive for this perfection, right? So progress over perfection.
Love that. That's a great statement. We could sum it up with just that, really. So, Maggie, I have one sort of final question for you, which is, it would be remiss of me to ask, but where's the future of Veg Out for you? Is there a particular kind of mission to move forward, or just in the spirit of the entrepreneurial spirit that you've approached it so far, is it all about kind of evolution and let's see where it goes?
Yeah, I definitely think, we always have to keep an open mind of like, I feel like if I try to come up with a plan and this is exactly what we're going to do, it's not going to end up well. I have to leave room for innovation and change. And that's also what the pandemic taught me, is like, you can never predict the future. So things now could look totally different than they do, a year from now. So, so being flexible, but also, with some direction and some goals. I definitely want to do more pop culture, more celebrity people interviews, as well as expand into. So we're in the big cities in the U.S., Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco. People know Veg Out, but I want to reach more places. So I want to continue to expand in the U.S. and then hopefully Canada and the U.K. eventually is my goal. But really just working on reach as well as content and putting out the best content we can for people. That's always the number one focus, is with our readers in mind, putting out the best, most timely content. So there's never a shortage of news, which is amazing, but I'd like to do more features on people and more features on lifestyle and maybe travel, now that we can travel again. So some different things versus just the food.
Well, I definitely think you and the team are creating some first class content, and I can't wait till it's over in the UK. So more power to you all, and a huge congratulations on what you built. I'm in awe of it. So
thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, Maggie. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you, and hopefully speak with you again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jim. Thanks for having me on.